The barn stood at the edge of the field, its wood faded by years of sun and rain. The boards had dried into a soft gray, and the roof carried patches of rust where tin had worn thin. Inside, the air was still. Dust hung in quiet layers that moved only when the light shifted. Nothing stirred, and nothing called attention to itself. A cat sat near the center of the barn, where the earth floor was hard and smooth from long use. Its body was relaxed, tail curled close, eyes half open. The cat was not watching anything in particular. It simply existed in the space, with the confidence of something that understood there was no need to be alert here. The dust carried old shapes, soft impressions of boots that had passed through years before, the faint round print of a bucket's bottom, the shallow grooves of wheels. None of the marks were sharp. Time had settled into them, smoothing their edges. The barn remembered but gently. Light entered through the gaps in the walls, thin lines of pale gold falling across the floor. The beams did not warm the space. They only revealed particles of dust moving slowly, suspended in the still air. Each fleck drifted without hurry, as though weight did not fully apply to it. A board in the rafters creaked, though nothing touched it. The sound was soft, not startling. Wood shifting under its own age, the memory of seasons held in grain and fiber. The cat flicked one ear, acknowledging the sound but not reacting. In one corner, a stack of hay remained. Though most of it had long since dried and lost its scent, the strands were brittle and colorless, breaking with the slightest pressure. Once animals had eaten here. Once hands had gathered feed and straw and tools in steady motion. The barn had been alive with the rhythm of work. Now, it simply rested. The cat breathed slowly, its eyes closed, then opened again. Outside, a wind moved across the field, bending the grass in long, even waves. The barn received only the faintest hint of it, a dull, low sound against the outer boards. The interior remained untouched. The dust remembered footsteps, but it did not replay them. The space held the memory of presence without longing. The cat remained still. The barn remained quiet. Nothing moved. Nothing needed to. The day continued in slow, even silence. The second day did not change the barn. The light entered the same way, in thin, slanted lines, through the gaps between old boards. Dust moved slowly through the beams, its motion small and unhurried. The air inside held the same dry scent of wood, hay, and time. Nothing new had been added. Nothing had been taken away. The cat remained in the barn. It had shifted its place only slightly, now sitting closer to the wall where the floor dipped in a shallow, worn groove. Its posture was calm, paws tucked beneath its body. Its breathing was quiet and even. The cat did not watch for anything. The barn was safe in the way places become when years pass without interruption. The dust held its soft memory of footprints. They were faint now, blurred into the floor. The marks no longer belonged to any particular person. They were only shapes left behind by lives that had moved on. The dust did not cling to meaning. It simply rested where it had fallen. Above, the rafters stretched dark and heavy across the ceiling. A length of rope hung from one of them, frayed and still. The wood gave a small, low sigh now and then, the sound of age adjusting itself without resistance. The barn had grown used to its own weight. Outside, a crow called once, the sound sharp and distant. The cat opened its eyes, not to respond, but to acknowledge the world beyond the walls. Then, the eyes closed once more. The barn returned to silence easily. A shaft of light widened briefly as a cloud shifted overhead. The dust brightened in its path, then dimmed again. The movement was slow enough that it felt like breathing. The floor had settled unevenly over the years. Earth pressed upward beneath it. The pattern of wear told where people once stood most often. Near the door, beside the old stall, under the loft ladder. Those paths no longer led anywhere. The marks remained because there was no reason for them to fade quickly. The cat stretched, front legs extending softly, tail uncurling. The movement made no sound. It settled again, eyes half open, half closed, in a place where time had loosened its grip. The barn did not ask for change. The quiet remained whole. The past lay gently across the floor, unbothered, unexamined. The day passed as softly as dust falls, each moment settling exactly where it landed. The third day carried the same stillness into the barn. The light outside shifted softly, but inside, the change was barely noticeable. The beams that entered through cracks in the walls moved only a small distance across the floor, slow enough that hours passed without feeling different from one another. Dust continued to drift in quiet patterns, suspended and unhurried. The cat rested near the old hay now, though not inside it, just close enough to feel the texture of it against its side. The hay no longer smelled of summer. Its scent was faint, dry, almost empty, but familiar in a way that did not require memory. The cat's eyes were half-lidded. Its breathing was calm. It did not sleep deeply, but it did not stay fully awake either. The barn allowed for neither need nor urgency. A loose feather lay on the floor near one of the old stalls, the kind that might have belonged to a chicken long ago. The edges were frayed, the color faded. It did not move when the door shifted in its hinges. It simply rested, held lightly by the thin layer of dust that had settled around it. The rafters overhead held shadows that did not change shape. They stretched along the beams, steady and familiar, as though they had learned the lines of the barn the same way the barn had learned silence. A small spider's web clung to a corner beam, its threads catching the faintest bit of morning light, glowing for just a moment before the light moved away. Outside, the wind passed along the walls, a slow, steady sound, like fabric moving or grass leaning. The barn absorbed most of it, letting only a soft murmur inside. The cat's ears twitched slightly, but the rest of its body did not move. The floor carried the memory of footsteps in shallow depressions, worn smooth where weight had once fallen repeatedly. But they no longer pointed to motion or purpose. They simply traced where lives had passed. The dust softened their edges more with each quiet day. The cat lifted its head and looked toward the large barn door, though nothing sounded there. It blinked once, twice, then lowered its head again. The gesture held no expectation. It was only the shape of noticing. A loft ladder leaned against the wall, unused for years. The wood had dried and cracked slightly, but still stood firm. Above it, the loft itself was empty, only boards and a few scraps of hay left behind. The light did not reach that high. The day moved forward in slow, seamless time. No footsteps returned. No tools were lifted. No animals moved through the stalls. The barn held its quiet. The dust remembered softly. The cat remained. Nothing stirred the stillness. Nothing needed to. The fourth day passed into the barn without bringing anything new. The light outside was a little brighter, but the barn softened it the same way it softened everything, turning it into pale, muted shapes across the floor. The beams of light moved slowly, crossing the ground in thin diagonal paths that shifted as the day unfolded. Dust drifted through them, floating in a rhythm that did not seem to begin or end. The cat had changed its place again, though only by the length of a few steps. It now sat near the open doorway, where the boundary between inside and outside was visible but not crossed. The door hung loosely on its hinges, open just enough for daylight to enter. The cat looked out, but not to search. Its gaze was soft, unfocused, resting on the general shape of the field beyond. The field itself remained quiet. Grass lay low, brushed by a faint breeze. Nothing moved with purpose. The world outside blended easily with the slow air inside the barn. The floor still held the worn prints of years gone. The marks remained shallow and blurred, but recognizable in their shapes. Where hooves once stood, the earth had been pressed firm. Where boots once walked, the ground dipped slightly. No one would follow them now. They led nowhere. They simply existed. A rope hanging from a rafter twisted slightly as the breeze entered the barn, but only a fraction of a turn. The movement was slow, almost hesitant. When it stopped, the barn returned to complete stillness. The rafters overhead were heavy with shadow. The wood had aged into a dark brown, softened by time, shaped by seasons of weather pressing against the barn from the outside. The beams did not creak today. They held their weight quietly, without commentary. A sparrow landed on the outer windowsill for a moment. It did not enter. It looked in, head turning once, quick and precise, before flying away. Its wings made a sound too soft to echo. The cat's ears flicked once in acknowledgement, but its eyes did not shift. The air in the barn felt settled, as though it had not moved in days. The dust remained suspended, falling only when it chose to in particles too small to track. The cat lowered its head and closed its eyes briefly, breathing slowly, comfortably. Outside, the grass swayed in a steady rhythm. Inside, everything remained as it had been. The barn did not ask for memory. It did not try to hold on to what had passed. It simply contained the shape of time that had already gone still. The cat stayed. The dust rested. The day continued without requiring change. The fifth day found the barn unchanged. The air inside remained still, holding the faint scent of old hay and dry wood. The dust drifted lightly through the thin shafts of sunlight, each particle moving in slow, wandering patterns before settling again. Time inside the barn did not hurry. It stretched, unbroken, with no sense of direction. The cat lay stretched along the wooden plank near the wall, where a bit of warmth gathered. Its body was relaxed, its breathing quiet. Its eyes were closed, but not deeply. Rest, not sleep. The barn's silence made such rest easy. Nothing startled here. Nothing intruded. The cat's ears moved occasionally, tracing the distant softness of sound outside, but its body did not shift. Near the far corner, an empty water bucket rested on its side. The metal had dulled with age, a faint layer of dust clinging to its surface. Once, it had been lifted and filled and emptied many times. Now it held only stillness, and the barn held it without asking it to be anything else. The hay that remained was scattered loosely across the floor. Some strands still held the pale gold they once had. Others had turned almost gray. The texture was brittle. When a breeze drifted through the open doorway, the hay lifted only slightly, then settled back into the same soft, uneven pattern. A board shifted quietly in the rafters, not from movement, but from the long memory of wood adjusting to time. The sound was low, familiar, almost like a sigh. The cat opened its eyes for a moment, then closed them again. Outside, a wagon passed somewhere along a distant road. Its wheels made a faint rumbling sound that did not reach clearly into the barn, only as a dull vibration. It might have been miles away. It might have been close. The distance did not matter here. The door creaked once as the breeze pushed it, though it did not open further. The beam of light that entered widened just a little, brushing across the floor in a slow, golden arc. Dust followed its motion, drifting upward, then sinking once more. The field beyond the doorway remained quiet. Grass bent and lifted under the faint movement of air. No voices, no footsteps, no work, just the slow rhythm of a place that had finished its purpose and settled into rest. The cat shifted one paw, stretching it forward, claws extending for a brief moment against the wooden plank. Then, the paw relaxed again. The motion was without intention, simply the body adjusting within stillness. Nothing changed. Nothing needed to. The barn held its quiet. The dust held its memories, and the day continued in soft, even time. The sixth day entered the barn in the same quiet way as the days before. The light seeped in through the spaces between old boards, soft and muted. It formed faint, angled shapes across the floor, shifting only as slowly as the sun outside allowed. The dust continued to drift in the narrow beams, its movement gentle and unhurried. The cat had moved again, though only slightly. Now it rested atop a low stack of boards along the wall, its body stretched long, tail hanging loosely over the edge. Its eyes were open just enough to see the barn without focusing on anything. The cat seemed at ease in the stillness, as though the quiet inside the barn matched something quiet in itself. The barn walls held their age without strain. The wood had dried into a pale, weathered tone. Some nails had loosened, some boards had bowed, yet everything held together. Nothing was new, nothing was breaking. The barn settled into the shape time had given it and did not resist. A patch of hay lay near the open door, where sunlight reached a little more strongly. The hay glowed faintly under the light, though its color remained dull. The strands did not move unless the faint breeze from outside passed through, and even then, they only lifted by the smallest degree before settling again. Outside, the wind passed along the field, but the sound entered the barn as only a soft hum. It moved around the edges of the open door, touching the air inside without disturbing it. The cat's whiskers shifted slightly with the faint movement, but its body remained still. Near the ceiling, a rope loop hung from a beam. It swayed once, lightly, though nothing had touched it. The motion was slow, almost imperceptible. When it stopped, the barn returned to silence. The floor held its shallow impressions, places where feet, hooves, and wheels once traveled. The marks were softened by dust and time. They no longer suggested movement. They simply remained, the shape of something that had already ended, though without sadness. The cat blinked slowly, its ears turned toward a distant sound, perhaps a bird outside, perhaps a shifting board. Then, its gaze settled back into stillness. A faint ray of sun widened along the floor as the day progressed, the beam sliding a few inches over many hours. The dust glimmered briefly in it, then drifted back out of view. Nothing changed in any deliberate way. Nothing asked to be noticed. The barn continued to hold its quiet. The cat continued to remain within it. The day unfolded in the same slow rhythm as all the others, steady and complete, needing nothing more than what was already here.